Our nation's seniors, the American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I gotta tell you, I remember when I was a kid, they used to play that game Hot Lava. You remember that when you were a kid? Where you couldn't step on the ground, you had to step on rocks or something because, hey, the lava was flowing. I saw a story over at CNN, caught my attention. Evidently in Arizona, as we speak, it's so hot that doctors are treating patients who are burned, literally burned, because they fell on the ground. They just fell, and by the time they got back up, burns. It's not fun anymore. It's not funny, I don't think. Anyway, let's go to the phones. We got Michael in Chicago on line one. Michael, how are you? We got you there, Michael?
Oh, pretty good. Could you hear me?
Yeah, listen to the phone, not to your radio.
Yeah, I like to talk about ranked choice voting.
What's on your mind?
Now, I think ranked choice voting is a better way to vote.
Okay.
In traditional voting, you only get one vote, one little tiny vote, even though 6 or 7 or 8 people are running for the district. You only get one vote. In ranked choice voting, you get 5 votes, 5 good votes. Your first place vote, second place vote, and so forth. And you have a better chance to influence the election. Now, in ranked choice voting, there's no need for an expensive runoff election. That's not necessary. One election will do the job. Now, many people will use their first choice vote as a protest vote, or to vote for a third party candidate, or vote for their own identity, their own racial or ethnic identity. And that's okay. But then you have your second and third place vote, and that would be for a candidate with a more broader appeal. So you could do both things with ranked choice voting. You could do a protest vote, get that out of the way, and then you could vote for Biden, the more moderate candidate who probably will win. Now, ranked choice voting is real good. It's coming to many cities now. I want to just list a few of the big cities that have ranked choice voting and are successful in using it. San Francisco, Oakland, Minneapolis, and St. Paul. And Seattle, Washington voted on it and got it approved. Portland, Oregon, and Salt Lake City. Now, I live in Chicago, Illinois. The only jurisdiction we have that approved it is Evanston, Illinois, a small suburb. But that's a start. And I think it's a better way to vote, and it will get more people voting. Nowadays, a lot of people don't vote. We had a big election in Chicago for mayor. It was a huge election. The television was loaded with campaign ads, and that's good. But only 35 or 38% of the people came out to vote because 9 people were running in the first election for the mayor of Chicago, and you only had 1 vote. And a lot of people felt their 1 vote wouldn't do any good. But if you had 5 votes, you have a better chance to influence the election.
Now, just so we're clear, so we're clear, you've said
that all the cities.
Right. But Michael, just so we're clear, because you've said you now have 5 votes. And I know my conservative listeners, our heads are exploding because they think you're going to get 5 votes. You really get 1 vote. You get 5 choices. You get 5 swings at the ball before you make your final vote, right? You're voting once for your first choice, your second choice, your third choice. There's a process by throwing some of the stuff out, in candidates out and recalculating. But your vote only counts once. Correct?
Yeah, for a state representative.
Yes.
You see, nowadays, more people are running. More candidates are running for used to be only 2 or 3. Now there's 5, 6, 7, 8 people running. For state representative in the primary, Democratic primary, let's say 7, 8 people are running for that one position, state representative. Well, you have 5 votes. You could vote for 5 of them out of the 8, you see. And it's one position, state representative, but you have 5 chances at swinging the bat, like you said.
Yeah.
So as more people get accustomed to it and learn how to vote, and they learn how to vote in San Francisco and Minneapolis, they're skilled at it, it'll be more popular. The only downside of, if I have to play devil's advocate is a sense, and what could be negative about ranked choice voting is that some of the elderly people say it's too confusing, it's too complicated, the 5 votes and how to sort them out. But the real problem is that the ballot is so long. That's a problem, but that's been around for 30, 40 years. You have to vote for 30, 40, 50 candidates in an election for all the various things. That's what the problem. It isn't ranked choice voting. It's the computer system. It's on the computer. But nowadays, more and more people, including the elderly, know how to use computers.
There you go.
Well, if you go to buy food, gasoline, everything, you got to do it on the computer, and they're more accustomed to it. So even the elderly people are accustomed to using a computer and on the election situation.
There you go.
Ranked choice voting.
Nope, good stuff. Appreciate it.
People, if we institute ranked choice voting, you can.
Yeah, no, I appreciate
you can still
the
vote for
thoughts.
just one person if you don't believe in voting for all 5 of them.
Gotcha. Gotcha. No, this is good. I mean, I'm with you. I think it's a good idea, Michael.
Louder, I can't hear you.
I think it's a good idea. Keep pushing it out there. And I know there's an organization that we just had a woman on the program just the other day talking about Illinois and ranked choice voting. So I'm right there with you, buddy. I appreciate the call, though. I got to move along. No, look, at the end of the day, I'm all in favor of this. The idea that I'm going to be able to go to the polls and I'll be able to vote my conscience, the first person I want. And if that person doesn't get 50% plus 1, my second choice is then tallied. And then if that person doesn't get 50% plus 1, then my third, my fourth, and as he said, however many down the line you need to get till you get to 50% plus 1. Because the goal is to have someone in that hall of power who has the majority of votes on their side. And this is where instant runoff voting, ranked choice voting, whatever you're going to call it, for me has always been a smart policy. So as Michael said, it's something good to pursue. Let's go to the phones. I got Kurt on line 2. Kurt, how you doing, buddy?
Well, thanks, Rick, for taking my call, and I'm glad that you enjoyed your trip in D.C. And also with my brother's Congresswoman, Marcy Kaptur, yesterday.
No, she was fabulous.
Yeah, she's been around for 11 billion years, as far as I can remember.
Is that an actual number? 11 billion?
It's a Stephanie Miller number, I think.
Oh, okay. I've never heard that before.
Okay, but anywho, you were talking about rich people, and you were saying, and I was on the phone with your screener when you were talking about this. You were talking about how the rich people in Pennsylvania are saying, "Oh, jobs are going to be gone because with all this union jobs and everything, we're going to have to pay people more, and that means no more jobs." Blah blah blah. Well, if you remember, we had a 65% union membership back in the great socialist Republican presidential days of Dwight Eisenhower.
Yep.
Okay. I don't seem to remember wealthy people crying about paying their employees higher union wages. In fact, all they had to do, my gosh, they had to give up maybe one extra yacht instead of having 2, they had 1, or instead of 2 summer homes, they had 1. So basically what these people today seem to be doing is they're kind of like poor people hoarding garbage. They want to just hoard the money for themselves, in a sense.
Yep. There's no surprise in that. If you give them the chance to hoard, they're going to.
Oh, absolutely. But it just comes down to, if you pay your people a decent wage, that means we're going to have more money coming into the tax system. It comes down to you need to start investing in people like we did after World War II up until Ronald Reagan. And if, as you know, I've actually been reading a book called over here how the GI Bill transformed the American dream? For every $1 that you and I, as a taxpayer, put into that program of the GI Bill, we got a $7 return on that investment. What Republican in this world, well, I shouldn't say this world because we know what kind of Republicans, but I'm saying what person in this world wouldn't want to get a $7 return on their $1 investment?
Clearly somebody who doesn't want government to work. I mean, this is the weird thing. I mean, we've got people who are more than happy to tell us government doesn't work, and then they set out to break things, which is why we were talking about UFOs today, Kurt. We weren't talking about how to make lives better. We're talking about UFOs.
Oh, yeah, but let me tell you this real quick. I was actually born with cataracts, so I was rendered legally blind for life. I grew up in a decent home. You know, my father was a union man. We had great Cadillac insurance, never had to pay a dime for it for 40 years. However, I was able to go through the Bureau of Services for the Visually Impaired in Stark County, Ohio, to have them pay for my college education, my room and board, all that, you know, books, all that stuff,
right,
to go to Kent State. You know, they wouldn't even look at me unless I sat down with a caseworker and said, you need to come up with a long-term plan before we do anything to pay for your schooling, which, by the way, you have to maintain, and I thought this was generous, you have to maintain at least a 2.0 GPA in order for us to pay 100% of your schooling in order for you to take this benefit. I made sure I had a 3.0. But what I'm getting at is my state, my community, they invested in me. And the day that I graduated from college was the day I got the job that I'm in presently, and that was 21, almost 22 years ago. So they invested in me to the point where I'm able to generate tax dollars to put back into my state and my community so that people who may need to benefit from that type of service can do so as well.
Yep, that's how it's supposed to work.
It does work.
Yep.
What's that?
That's how it's supposed to work.
Exactly. That's exactly how it's supposed to work, and I think people kind of forgot about that.
Kurt, I appreciate the call, man. Good story, good stuff. Thanks so much. Look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Thank
you. No, look, I mean, this is how this is supposed to work. I mean, you pay taxes to help the helping hand up, not the hand out, hand up. And those I love hearing stories like that. But real quick, check out fairvoteillinois.org. For what's going on in the Chicago area and in Illinois around the idea of ranked choice voting and instant runoff voting. We had one of their statewide organizers on the program sometime when we were at Netroots. We could probably dig that up at some point, but she was fabulous. But fairvoteillinois.org, the website, if you want more information on ranked choice voting in Illinois. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1877. That was the day striking railroad workers in Chicago clashed with police in the Battle of the Halsted Street Viaduct. The Great Railroad Strike had reached the nation's railroad hub and began there 3 days earlier. Switchmen from the Michigan Central traveled to freight shops in yards across the city, calling workers out to strike. Soon, lumber shovers, butchers, and industrial workers joined the strike. By the time the battle began, police had already clashed with unarmed strikers twice. Historian Richard Schneveroff describes the scene leading up to the battle. The city was now preparing itself for a full-scale insurrection, even though violent confrontations were rooted in police attacks on non-violent crowds. Previous confrontations centered in the railroad yards. Now, striker actions spilled over into the neighborhood of Pilsen, where they live. Thousands gathered along Halsted Street between 12th and 16th Streets. The police arrived attempting to disperse the crowd. They chased the strikers south and, as Schneveroff describes, emptied their revolvers into the masses of humanity. The crowd pelted the police with stones in defense and chased them over the viaduct. As word spread of the pitched battle, stockyard workers from nearby Bridgeport walked off the job. They marched along Halsted Street with butcher knives in hand to support the strikers under attack. The crowd on Halstead swelled to more than 10,000 as workers continued to battle police. By evening, 30 workers had been shot dead. Hundreds more were seriously wounded. But the strike continued to spread more fiercely. Streetcar stockmen, stone cutters, gas workers, glass cutters, and others joined the strike. The city was shut down for another week until railroad bosses finally rescinded wage cuts. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
As John Mellencamp sings, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. True. And it's equally true that if you stand for everything, you won't amount to anything. In a remarkable achievement, a newly formed political party calling itself No Labels has managed to fall into both traps, standing up for everything and nothing at all. The fledgling entity is using every synonym in the book to assure everyone that it is a middle-of-the-road bipartisan centrist, both sides party, offering hybrid liberal-conservative solutions that won't offend anyone. But wait, they've chosen a multimillionaire coal baron and a multimillionaire son of a global plastics polluter to be their standard bearers. As a presidential ticket, Democrat Joe Manchin and Republican John Huntsman probably would unite voters of both parties against them. While they don't stand for much, there is one huge overriding issue that the No Labels hucksters strongly agree on: corporate money contaminating American politics. These, quote, reformers are in favor of it. Indeed, secret fat cat donations are the No Labelers' financial lifeline, having already hauled in hundreds of thousands of dollars from right-wing corporate interests, such as, No, say the founders, we can't tell you who's buying the No Labels label, for the funders don't want the public to know their names or their special interests. Of course, secret funding of elections equals secret government of, by and far, the funders. By standing against the people's right to know, the group has put a flaming neon fraud label on their hokey reform party. Huntsman even admits it, saying financial disclosure would be the right thing to do, but, quote, that's not the way you play the game. This is Jim Hightower saying, the game? Just what we need. Another gang of corporate politicos who think governing America is a game to be won by hook or crook.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So here on the program, we've been talking about AI for some time, a couple of years now, actually. And the job tsunami loss that we're going to have once it finally takes over. And that report that was published, I think like 4 or 5 years ago, that said in 20 years, half of the jobs we do, or we did back then, will be gone. Half. I've got some friends who are going, that's probably a little accurate. We should be worried. But I saw the story over at Wired.com. Says that, hey, soldiers, you could be out of work because the AI-powered, totally autonomous future of war is here. Ships without crews, self-directed drone swarms. Evidently, this is what the U.S. Navy's working on. Off-the-shelf robotics and AI for the next conflict. Sounds great. Sounds, well, scary. And here to share some thoughts on just how scary, I've asked Adam Connor to come talk with us. Adam is the Vice President of Technology Policy there at the Center for American Progress, AmericanProgress.org, the website. Adam, thanks for taking time for us.
Always happy to be here.
So let's start with Adam Connor. You're not related to Sarah, are you?
Well, if the machines are asking, I'm definitely not related to Sarah Connor. But no, I'm just a New Mexican here trying to make his way in this world of artificial intelligence.
New Mexico. Okay, before we get into the AI stuff, alien stuff, all over today. Republicans crazy on AI, on the UFOs. Which side are you on?
Look, I grew up in New Mexico, and I would just say I've always believed, and it's just everyone else here is kind of finally catching up to what we know is the truth. And I'd also be remiss if I didn't plug the fact that the newest movie, Oppenheimer, is about my hometown. So make sure to stop by your theaters and see it as well.
There you go. No, my kids and I are looking forward to it. It's one of those things where we've said, you know what, we've got to go see that movie. It's 3 hours long, though.
It's quite long.
But let's get to the AI stuff. Obviously, the future of war could possibly be robots and AI, but more importantly to me, the future of work. I mean, that's the scary part.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting about AI is we're at what I like to call one of those moments where you're kind of not quite sure it's going to fall. And we know things are going to change, and it's just a matter of, do they change as fast as some people say they could, or is it a little more gradual and bam, and I think one of the things that's really been interesting about the last few months, and I'm sure your listeners are familiar with this, is that the technology of automated systems of AI has been kind of steadily advancing in the background for a lot of years. And there's a lot of people who've been talking about it, but it hadn't really broken through to the public. But then, this generative AI, the ChatGPT kind of comes out, and all of a sudden people kind of get it. And I think one of the reasons that they get it so clearly is, all this stuff that's been happening in the past was really kind of machines talking to machines or computers talking to computers. And this generative AI, it kind of spits out text, or it spits out audio or video, or things that you can just consume with your ears and your eyes. And I think for a lot of people, that was the kind of aha moment that says, oh, okay, like it talks to us, it can talk like us. And that might mean it could replace us in certain kind of ads.
And that's the scary stuff. And this is why you've got the Writers Guild and the SAG-AFTRA folks who are on strike right now, because, one of the scary parts of this, as one of the leaders at the Writers Guild pointed out, or as the Screen Actors Guild pointed out, that the extras can go for a day's work, get $100, and the studio gets to keep their image and likeness and use it, on it in perpetuity for forever and ever and ever, and they get 1 day's pay.
They get 1 day's pay, and then
what they can get away with.
1 day's pay, and then they have enough extras in the AI machine at a certain point. There are just no more extras anymore, right? And, I think that's why the stand the WGA and SAG-AFTRA is taking is so critical right now, because they know if they give it up today, it's never coming back. It is even more so than I think what we've seen disruption in other industries, where maybe a factory physically moves away or something goes away, but the work still is done somewhere else by people. If they give up that ability to kind of do the human work of it, it's never coming back. And I think they're really the kind of canary in the coal mine for what this could mean.
No, and this is the scary part of all this, because, if that report from a couple of years is accurate, half of all the jobs that were done, 4 or 5 years ago will be wiped away by machines or automation or robotics. What are people going to do? Look, I've spent, 35 years in the trucking industry. I know at some point, probably in my lifetime, you're going to see automated trucks, running like trains down the highway with nobody behind the wheel. Maybe in my lifetime at some point, probably a lot sooner than I want. And you've even got people like Tucker Carlson who are coming out and saying that should never happen, because guess what? That's the job most high school educated men, that's what they do. What are you going to do with all these people?
And I think that's a really critical point. If we just let this technology run unchecked, as we know what happens when corporations get a tool that saves them money, they don't plow that money back into hiring more workers or into, they wring every bit of efficiency out of them and then get rid of them. And so, one of the things that we talk about at CAP, and that I know the president is also focused on, is, this can't just be innovation that destroys jobs, right? That doesn't leave us in a better place. It has to be innovation that we make sure, hopefully, if others will let us, creates good jobs or complements workers instead of just destroying jobs. And that's, I think, really AI is going to impact a lot of different things. You mentioned the future of warfare. It's going to impact all sorts of different things. But I think fundamentally, when it comes to jobs, a question we're really going to have is, how much of this can we harness to help workers to make maybe their lives better or safer? And how much of this can we make sure isn't just utilized to destroy livelihoods?
I see it as horribly destructive. I see this as a bigger technological advancement than any in the history of this country. Go back to the Industrial Revolution, when we were doing things with horse and buggies, to then with machines. I see this as even bigger than that, because at least you could learn a new skill. You could do this. Can eventually, from what I'm being told, and you're the expert in this, Adam, that eventually these computers are going to be able to learn new tasks, and they will completely make us, worthless.
I don't know about completely worthless, but what is really going to happen that we haven't seen is it's going to disrupt kind of blue collar. It's going to disrupt white collar. Its potential is really to upset, the whole spectrum of jobs. And you could imagine, for instance, jobs that people do today that involve, maybe inputting data or doing basic analysis or research or writing TV shows. These are things that at some point they thought being a lawyer being a certain kind of doctor, might be protected by these things, and it's going to disrupt them as well. And so I think a question that ends up here is there a way that we can ensure that these kind of complement jobs and are focused in that way? Or if they're going to take jobs, how do we do one of two things? One, make sure that money that is being made isn't just benefiting those who are destroying the job. So is there a tax situation on AI that we should be thinking about? And is that money going back into ensuring we build good jobs, maybe through a job guarantee or other things? Like, we're going to have to confront this a lot sooner than I think a lot of people think. I think it is not a silver lining. But, I worked in the social media companies at the beginning of the social media age. We saw how that kind of spread around the world and had a lot of negatives too. But, that kind of was isolated to your phone or your computer and then kind of spread to the real world. If this is as disruptive to jobs as we hope it is, I think, one, my hope is that people will speak out so policymakers hear them. And then two, that if it happens quickly, it happens quickly enough that we can put a stop to it and say this is serious enough. But, that's going to take people taking it seriously in the policymaking world, and that's going to take people speaking up when this is affecting them.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show here with Adam Connor. He's the Vice President of Technology Policy at the Center for American Progress. You want to check out the work that they do, americanprogress.org, the website. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at the work that Adam and the folks over at CAP do. But what do you say to the person like me who believes cat's already out of the bag? You're not putting this genie back in the bottle. These tech companies have invested so much time, energy, money. The politicians seem to be, we've got a Republican House that they're talking about UFOs today. We're so far behind on anything that's going to help working people, with a health security, retirement security, wages, educate, all of these other problems. This just seems to me that, it's too far gone. What ray of hope would you give me?
I would try and give you and your listeners two rays of hope. And I wouldn't say these are promises. This isn't something where we always get the outcomes we want, particularly for working people. But I think there's two things to be hopeful for. One is that this technology is advancing quickly, but it hasn't reached the point of no return yet. It's kind of, it may be there soon, it may be in the next few years, but it's not completely there yet. And we still have a moment to say we can govern this technology instead of having it govern us. I think the second is that, this isn't going to be a technology that just impacts one sector of the economy or one part of the country. It's going to be widespread enough that regardless of whether you're Democrat or Republican, regardless of kind of, your base for political support, they're going to be impacted. And when everybody is impacted by something, there's sometimes a chance for people to take it seriously and try and address those problems. Now, again, not a promise that they will. But, this isn't going to just be a red state, blue thing or a city thing only. This is going to be something that's going to impact a lot of different places and people. And my hope is that that'll allow people to, at least speak up enough that politicians have to fear it and take it seriously.
Now, you said something a moment ago on the tax front. I said about 10 years ago that as this technology, all this different technology keeps rolling out, because I believe we have to tax things. I believe in tax incentives for people to do certain things and taxes to discourage certain behavior. I think there should be a technology tax put in place to help people transition as we lose jobs. Truck drivers, who are clearly going to be one of the first ones to go. Doctors who read X-rays, they're probably going to go at some point. Name the industry. I think there has to be some kind of a technology tax to where the productivity gains are then shared and not hoarded at the top like most productivity gains right now have been. I'm curious, is there anything that you know of that's banging around in Washington there that might lead us in that direction?
I am not the tax guy, but I will say I know my colleagues on our econ team here at CAP have been thinking about this a lot. And I think, you hit it right on the head. In addition to taxing those that are benefiting this and maybe thinking about where we can redirect this to retrain workforce or make sure it's creating good jobs. Can you build in incentives? Can we give tax breaks to those who incentivize good jobs, that complemented by AI, not just destroying them? I think that's something we're thinking a lot about. And the other is, we have a real monopoly problem in this country. I know you're aware of it. I know your listeners are aware of it. There aren't a lot of choices. There's not a lot of competition. And unfortunately, because of the power big tech has, there's a couple of companies that have all the data and have all the computing power to run the advanced AI. And so they're going to continue to benefit from this, the Googles, the Amazons, and the Microsofts of the world. And so there's also just a question of, in addition to the technology tax you might have mentioned, or can we give taxes, should there just be a monopoly tax, right? Is that a place where if you're going to have such a concentrated amount of power and profits that there should be an additional tax? We think that's a reasonable thing to be discussing on the table. And I think it's going to seem more and more reasonable if power keeps concentrating in the hands of a couple companies, which House Republicans may be focused on UFOs and a lot of things I disagree on, but I think they're as uncomfortable with a couple of tech companies controlling the world as Democrats are.
Yeah. At the end of the day, though, we working people, we're not going to. Every technological change, working people take it on the chin. I keep saying this cannot be another one of those times. Because I fear, and this is where I want to wrap this up, is I fear that this then turns into mass chaos, to violence, to all kind of things. Because when you have people who look, truck driving is, as Tucker Carlson pointed out, the job most high school educated men do. When they are no longer productive and they no longer have the ability to support their families, chaos will ensue. I guarantee it.
I think that's right. I think one of the reasons at CAP we've talked about a job guarantee or other things is because we understand that, if inequality is very bad, but inequality paired with lack of employment is really destabilizing, right? And so we have to be aware that this could be another factor that lights the match onto what's already, as you know, not the greatest situation in this country when it comes to how people are feeling. And so I will say this, I'm not here to give silver linings, but I've worked with a lot of politicians over the years. I know you've talked to a lot of politicians, and, fear motivates them. And I think if they are worried that the technology is taking all the jobs that they might get blamed for it, or their constituents, may be out of work, that fear might motivate them to do something productive. So I'm not a person that says we should only deal with fear, but my hope is it scares them into doing the right thing. And at least hopefully that can be something we hope for.
Yeah. And it's not just here at home. I mean, we're talking globally. Yeah. This is a problem going to destabilize the globe. And I don't know that we should have that kind of power. I don't know that should exist. Just my thoughts. But Adam, I appreciate you sharing some thoughts with us. I'm sure this is not going to go away. I'd love to have you back again down the road.
Always happy to join.
Good stuff, Adam Cotter. Appreciate the time, man. Again, this is one of those things where, as I've been saying, we need to get on these politicians early, often, and get it moving in the right direction. But make sure you check out the work that Adam and his crew do over at the Tech Policy Group at the Center for American Progress, AmericanProgress.org. The website can take a quick break. Right back with your thoughts. Stick around. 1-866-416-RICK. 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people on the talk.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1990. That was the day that George H.W. Bush signed into law the Americans with Disabilities Act. The ADA prohibits employment discrimination of people with disabilities and requires public accommodations to be accessible. The passage of the act was the result of years of grassroots organizing by members of the ADA community and their allies. When President Bush signed the law, he said that if he had to thank everyone who had been involved, we'd never get out of here before sunset. The passage of the act had bipartisan support, but many business leaders worried about the ADA's effect, fearing the costs of accessibility accommodations to their bottom lines. While most business leaders did not oppose the act outright, they did push for amendments and concessions to weaken its impact. The business newspaper, The Wall Street Journal, called the act, quote, the Lawyers' Employment Act, warning that a flood of lawsuits on disability issues would harm businesses. In signing the bill, President Bush addressed business leaders specifically. He said, quote, "You've called for new sources of workers. Well, many of our fellow citizens with disabilities are unemployed. They want to work, and they can work. And this is a tremendous pool of people. And remember, this is a tremendous pool of people who will bring to jobs diversity, loyalty, proven low turnover rate, and only one request: the chance to prove themselves." The passage of the ADA paved the way for fundamental changes in America's infrastructure, such as accessibility ramps, spots for wheelchairs on buses and subways, and parking accommodations. This was a major step forward, yet more work remains in order to build a society truly accessible to all. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So I love the story that the Federal Trade Commission is readying some lawsuits to go after Amazon and to break up Amazon. Again, you know, what's interesting, what Adam brought up, a monopoly tax, most absolutely, certainly, we definitely need something like that. Let's go to the phones. We've got Steve from Chicago on line one. Steve, how are you, buddy?
Fine, thank you.
What's on your mind, brother?
Yes, so I wanted to make a couple of points, and I think that the whole technology question, I mean, it depends on what we're talking about. For instance, it can lead to perpetual war. One of the reasons we were able to prosecute the war in Afghanistan for 2 decades was because technology gave us the capacity to do what's called a force multiplier. And the technology was doing the job that once would have required a lot more troops on the ground. And though I certainly respect the men who lost their lives, those who were injured there fighting that war, the reality is that after 20 years, a little over 2,000 actually were killed in combat. And that means that it's not the kind of thing that people are necessarily in the streets protesting against, unlike the Vietnam War, where you could literally have as many lost in a few days as we would lose in a year in Afghanistan. Yeah. So what happens when you can prosecute a war across on the other side of the world without really any Americans? You can fight it from inside a trailer in Virginia using drones and other sorts of things. So that can be a recipe for perpetual war. The other thing is, and you've already addressed it, is the whole economic dimension of this, because during the Industrial Revolution, we saw the same sort of thing. Technology was utilized, but not to the benefit of average people. It gave us the robber barons, these immensely wealthy individuals of the Gilded Age, because productivity skyrocketed, but that didn't filter down to people. It just meant that it was cheaper to produce things using labor, and because technology made it so, and then you could sell that. Now the inevitable result of this formula in the modern age is that sooner or later, who are you going to sell to if nobody is working any longer and everything is run by technology? Somebody's got to make a living in order to buy your stuff. But of course, everybody assumes that somebody else will be working somewhere else. But as long as we automate our industry and utilize technology, if we can just have one guy working somewhere in front of a screen, and we don't need any more workers, well, yeah, but somebody else has got that idea across other industries as well. And at some point, people who can't work can't buy your things. And the fact is that we were sold a bill of goods over the last 40 years because the real amount of money that Americans make has been this sort of bait and switch equation, because we went from literally one person working in most homes in a factory job in the 1960s to 2 people working in the 80s and 90s and up until today. So when we say, well, this is where the average American, what the average American family is making, yeah, that's because we added 100% more workers.
And I would argue, Steve,
we've got kids.
I would argue that we now need 3 incomes to have that same standard of living our grandparents' generation did.
Exactly. So I mean, we've got to put in place mechanisms that say that you didn't get here by yourself. This industry, the Jeff Bezos of the world. Jeff Bezos runs a delivery service essentially. Amazon doesn't produce things, and it runs based upon the things that we and our parents and our grandparents paid for, airports and roads and other infrastructure that Jeff Bezos utilizes and exploits to get us things much more quickly. Okay, great, but he didn't build those things. A society built those things, And, it's time to start taxing these people accordingly in terms of what they benefit from that we paid for.
Yeah. No, I mean, Bezos is a perfect example. The great crime behind his success is that he cheated every state in this country out of sales tax for years. And that's how they grew and got the advantage over everybody else. But you hear, though, Steve, competition. Well, what competition gets us is monopoly. Look at what Amazon's been getting away with.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we could just sort of create a formula, no one's suggesting, at least I'm not. I'm not one of these socialists. I believe it. You can still become a billionaire in America. But you know what? You're going to have to pay a greater percentage of what you make as you move up that scale in terms of wealth. And that money has to filter back into the lives of average people. And you know what? There's a reason why we're starting to discuss in the Western world, instead of a 40-hour work week, maybe 35, maybe 30, because productivity doubled in the last 40 years, and then it doubled again. Are we working less? No. So why isn't it why don't we go ahead and create a system in which we say, you know what, as productivity goes up, yes, you can have billionaires, and average people get to work a little bit less, spend more time with their families, do other things that we regard as enriching our lives, rather than spending our lives, working day and night until we keel over and die, or until we can no longer work and hope that we have enough money to put away so that we don't die in the streets.
No, I'm right there with you, Steve. Good stuff. Appreciate the thoughts. I look at this, and again, he's not wrong. At the end of the day, we need to have policymakers who are looking towards the future. And, like I said a moment ago, that we've got a potential war machine that's going to be all automated. And he's right. That could be perpetual war on all sides. That could eventually happen here. This is scary technology. It's the kind of thing I don't know that mere mortals should be allowed to. You shouldn't be allowed to touch. Just my thoughts. But as I'm looking at where we are, and I've said for years, and I've always been the person who says the tax code is where we create billionaires, and we have. I want to dig up the good socialist president Dwight Eisenhower and reenact his tax codes, because it created broad shared prosperity. We can do that again, and we need to do that again, because this technology is going to be really disruptive, and I fear, like all of these, that it's going to be working people who take it on the chin, which is why you're seeing in these labor fights, and the Teamsters in their labor fights with freight companies saying, look, you're not going to automate the trucks. With UPS, there was language in there to tap down on the technological. Now, are they putting their members at a disadvantage, and their member companies at a disadvantage, because you're going to have other companies who just go full tilt towards it? This is where I keep saying this is why we need to be organizing more. And I'm hoping that as this rolls down, people wake up and in their radical self-interest go, yeah, I do need some protection on the job. I do need a voice that's going to stand up to protect my family and the future. Something that needs to happen. I want to hear your thoughts, though. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. You got something on your mind? Want to hear it. Also, if you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you get your favorite podcasts, you will certainly find ours. Right back after this. Stick around.
I don't know that we can actually talk about normals, because it will keep changing. It will just keep getting warmer.
Summer 2023 is breaking records for record-breaking.
The oceans are also suffering heat waves. Actually, the oceans are running a fever.
Ocean heat wave damaging Florida's fragile coral reefs. Plus,
people don't want this.
Biden administration unveils new efficiency rules for water heaters. Republicans freak out.
All of those Republican freakouts and hopefully more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
They're trying to change the standards on this in order to have people buy more efficient appliances.
Wow, that sounds terrible. More efficient appliances? You can pry my inefficient, expensive old water heater from my slightly warm, dead hands. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Dizzy Doyen, is there anything these Republicans will not freak out about when the administration comes up with kind suggestions to help them save money and stay safer?
Of course not.
Oh, brother, what do you got for us today?
Well, first, the record heat waves striking across the northern hemisphere are not letting up. In Greece, the extreme heat and dryness has turned vegetation into a tinderbox. Officials have mounted that nation's largest ever evacuation at the height of tourism season on the islands of Rhodes and Corfu due to more than 100 raging infernos. The heat energy has also generated bizarre storms in Europe, like the extreme rain and hail storm in the Italian town of Sorrento over the weekend that turned the flooded streets into literal ice flows in the middle of July. Canada is still grappling with its worst wildfire season on record, with more than 27 million acres burned. Europe's climate service estimates that carbon emissions from Canada's fires this year are on track to be more than double Canada's previous wildfire emissions record year in 2014.
Oh, Canada.
But in Nova Scotia,
we got 3 months worth of rain in less than 24 hours. It came fast and it came furious.
Quote, unimaginable damage from a deadly storm system that dumped 10 inches of rain in less than 24 hours, causing that province's worst flooding in 50 years.
Wow.
In the U.S., forecasters say the weeks-long blistering heat wave in the Southwest is expanding its misery to most of the country. As we go to air, Phoenix is on a record streak of 25 consecutive days of temperatures above 110 degrees, breaking its previous record of 18 days with no signs of stopping yet.
Ouch.
Arizona hospitals are seeing a spike in the number and severity of patients with significant severe burns from falling onto hot pavement. Officials say the excessive heat has killed at least 4 people in national parks across the Southwest. Off the coast of Florida, a marine heat wave with sustained water temperatures hovering around 95 degrees is impacting the state's coral reefs. Scientists with the Coral Restoration Foundation reported widespread signs of coral bleaching. At least one coral reef restoration site recorded 100% coral mortality.
How's that restoration going?
The surge in extreme weather is also a wake-up call for agriculture. A new study warns that the world needs to prepare for more frequent crop failures. The researchers say because the climate crisis is changing weather patterns and slowing down the jet stream, that in turn is increasing the risk of simultaneous crop failures in multiple agricultural regions around the world.
And yet, with all of this news, you would be stunned at how many people I'm hearing from on Twitter with the hashtag climate scam. It's just summer.
With the prolonged extreme heat waves across the global north, NASA predicts July 2023 will likely rank as the planet's hottest month ever recorded since record-keeping began in the 1850s, and they say 2023 and 2024 are likely to rank as the hottest years ever recorded.
Hashtag climate scam.
According to NOAA, in the past month, nearly 5,000 U.S. heat and rainfall records were broken or tied, and more than 10,000 new heat records were set globally. In a press conference, NASA scientist Gavin Schmidt said these new records are the long-predicted consequences of human-caused global warming.
That is going to continue. And the reason why we think that's going to continue is because we continue to put greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And until we stop doing that, temperatures will keep on rising.
Finally, the Biden administration on Monday proposed new standards for outdated home water heaters, making them cheaper and more efficient, estimating the new rules will save Americans money on energy and water bills, collectively saving Americans more than $11 billion every year. Congressional Republicans are outraged that Biden is forcing American families to pay less for energy and water and breathe cleaner air in their own homes while removing a chunk of the nation's greenhouse gas emissions.
You know, if we could just power the earth on Republican outrage, we could end this global warming problem tomorrow. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So yesterday we were in Washington, D.C., the big event we had with AFA CWA President Sarah Nelson and Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur. But before the event that we held with those two folks, Sarah Nelson and I and my son Alex were down at the AFL-CIO's headquarters, Black Lives Matter Square Plaza there, with the Writers Guild folks out leafleting, informing people of, the movie that they were going to go in to see. Someone had to write that. Someone's image had to be protected for that. Hey, this is why we're out there. Little informational picket, informing folks. Because look, this idea of protecting jobs, this idea of, as we've been talking about, taking on AI and what is the future of work in this country? Kind of a big thing. But while those are the ones that the Teamsters and the Writers Guild are getting all the attention, there are other folks who are struggling to make inroads as well. And, hotel workers, truck drivers, you name it. And that's why I've asked Mark Kreidler to come talk with us. He's a columnist over at Capital in Maine. You can check out his website, markkreidler.com. Mark, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Rick.
So I'm looking at this Writers Guild strike, and I'm going, these folks are just fighting for their existence. But in your piece, and you've got a great article, and I hope folks will take a look at. In this piece, you talk about how the executive, an unknown executive, said, "You know what? We don't care. We'll starve them out. We'll go as long as we need to go to these people lose their apartments, lose their savings, lose everything." And I got to tell you, that to me harkened back to the good old days of the 80s and 90s, and not the 1980s and 90s with the folks like Jay Gould. I can easily pay half the working class to murder the other half. It rang of that for me. I'm curious what you thought.
Yeah, it was interesting because you don't often hear a person in that position say the quiet part out loud, even if they weren't saying it for attribution. The news site Deadline, it reports essentially on Hollywood industry stuff, is the place where that story first broke, and they did quote the executive very specifically as saying, "Look, our plan is to dig in until these writers begin to lose their apartments and lose their homes." Those were the words. There was another executive quoted as saying this stuff had been laid in, this plan had been laid in long before the strike actually became a thing. And a third was quoted as saying, this is a cruel but necessary tactic. So, yeah, I think you can, even though the Alliance of movie and television producers tried to walk that back by saying, hey, these unnamed people don't speak for us, their actions make it really clear that if that isn't the intent, Rick, that's exactly where they're headed, because they are not negotiating. There are no negotiations. There are none scheduled. It's been going on for months now. So it's not really that hard to guess that they're trying to starve out the workers, but that's not new news.
Right.
It's just different because we're talking about Hollywood.
No, what's different here in this, and look, as you've said, this is not new. This is every strike that's ever been. It's who can survive the longest. It's a war of attrition. Where employers are like, hey, we're going to try and starve you out, and labor's, hey, we're going to last one day longer. The difference here, I think, in this moment is this is, hearkening back to, as I said, the robber baron era, where you had these monopolies who could hold out, and like these big behemoths have the power to withstand these losses, and it's not going to harm them as much as it's going to these workers. And I think that has a lot to say about how weak our labor laws are.
Oh, there's no question about that. You're right. There are kind of two things going on at the same time. And one is, this has been coming on for decades, but, decades of deregulated takeovers and mergers means, more and more power is concentrated in fewer and fewer companies. Again, not new news, but it's hit Hollywood to the point where even studios that you would consider major, like Universal Movie Studios, they're owned by Comcast. They were swallowed up by Comcast, some time ago. Disney took over an entire studio in Hollywood, in addition to everything else that Disney already holds. And so, what often happens, and the writers are experiencing this, the actors in SAG-AFTRA, the Actors Guild, are also experiencing this, is you think you're negotiating with, let's say, Hollywood, but you're really negotiating with a New York boardroom or the boardroom of a multinational corporation, wherever it might be headquartered, in which your concern is but a tiny sliver of their corporate concern. There's a really great article, by the way. Jennifer Rubin wrote this in the Washington Post. Jennifer's been a columnist at the Post for a long time, but prior to that, Rick, she was a labor and employment lawyer for a bunch of different Hollywood studios. She's very familiar with the industry in LA. And basically she said, look, in the same sense that some banks were deemed too big to fail, some of these corporations may now be on the brink of being too big to strike. Their pockets are just way too deep. They've got the resources, and if you're Hollywood, if you're the writers, for example, there's 11,000 writers in the Writers Guild, you just don't take up but a tiny, tiny bit of their bandwidth in terms of what their corporation's trying to do. And where does labor law come in? Well, nowhere, because the labor laws as currently written are A, 50 years out of date, and B, so weak that they make no difference.
And the fact that, the reality is what these studios want to do is just replace those people as a whole and have computers do their work. And this, again, is, we were just talking a little bit ago about, the tech that's coming and what it's going to do, with us, we, the working people. I look at this strike going on with the Writers Guild and the SAG-AFTRA as the front line of the AI war. This is the first battle in what's going to be the future of work in this country. And we working people had better come around to the idea that we should be on the side of the working people.
Agreed. I think that's something that the writers and particularly actors have had to try to find ways to combat, because the public perception is, you're a rich Hollywood actor. What do I care about your labor situation? For the writers in particular, part of what brought them to the brink of a strike and then to a strike is the fact that over the last several years, a number of the studios have said, we're going to use fewer writers. Now we're going to use fewer, now fewer, now fewer. And eventually the idea is that, AI could replicate or amalgamate the work that writers have done for decades, from, a century and beyond. And essentially replace the writers outright. Now, with actors, their concern over AI is a little bit more shaded, but it's not hard to understand.
Right.
They stand against the studios being able to film their image and then replicate that image in a million other uses. And so in both cases, I think we tend to get distracted by the fact that occasionally one of the people speaking about this issue is someone I've seen on TV or that I've seen in a movie. And it lends sort of this weird air of unreality to the whole thing. But they're fighting a ground level battle. It is absolutely, to your point, it's a ground level fight for their continued value as workers, period. And it's really important to keep in mind, and this is true of course in Hollywood right now, but it's true, in so many places in our country, that you're dealing again with multinational corporation that doesn't care at all about that, because they're not really in the entertainment business. They're in the stock profit business. And you're just one small part of their overall push to raise that stock price.
No, it's all about the dollars and cents. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show with Mark Kreidler. Mark's a columnist over at Capital and Main. You can check out his website, markkreidler.com. Most certainly you need to check out his most recent article, How Striking Hollywood Creators and Hotel Housekeepers Face the Same Kind of Obstacles. And those obstacles are a behemoth corporation who have extraordinarily deep pockets. Now, in your article, you do talk about the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors, and how they're handling their situation. Now, housekeepers, they got other problems because they can't all withhold their labor because you know what? They'll all be replaced tomorrow if I'm getting this right.
Yeah, it's a really interesting twist. So the actors and the writers both just straight up struck. They walked off. Productions have been halted. You know, there's very little Hollywood production even occurring right now, unless it's a straight reality series. And even in that case, a lot of people will not work on those shows. But that's a calculated gamble, especially with the actors. You know, they're sort of in a stronger position because I think they can reasonably say, go ahead, try and make a movie or a TV show without us. The hotel workers are not in that position. They are far more easily replaced, but they do, just like the Writers Guild and SAG-AFTRA, the Actors Guild, they do face corporate behemoths. You might be standing in a picket in front of one hotel near, Los Angeles International Airport, but the truth is you're trying to battle Hilton or Hyatt or Marriott or one of the private equity firms that is also a multinational that holds several of these properties at once. It's not hard. I've done it. Anyone who wants to and interested enough can do it. You can look on job sites in LA and see that these hotels are already, trying to pre-stack their deck with workers who are ready to come in and take the shifts of anyone who strikes. So instead of going off, en masse, thousands and 15,000 hotel workers all going out at once, they've done these targeted strikes, Rick, where they will hit 6 or 7 hotels for a day or 2 days. They started with a 3-day strike in the downtown hotels in LA. Every one of those has the benefit of generating headlines, but also the hotels, who are at this point sort of loosely bargaining as a group, about 45 of them are bargaining as an alliance. They don't know what's coming. They don't know who's getting struck and when. And it's far more effective, but it's also, as the Guild in LA has shared with me, it's kind of their only move. They can't go off the job. They can't just walk off. They'll be replaced. And again, this is where, in a different time, labor law would step in and say, you can't do that.
Right.
But in this time and place, it can be done.
Not only labor law was different, but we were different. And I'm hoping, this is one of those things where I come back to, I'm hoping that we somehow wake up and take back some of the ideas of the old mentality and shut things down where across, across industries. And I know secondary boycotts or secondary strikes are illegal and all that stuff. But you know what? In the 1930s, they didn't care about laws. They shut things down.
Yeah. It's been interesting to see in Los Angeles, especially, there are a number of unions that are cooperating in ways that they've never done before. There are, the hotel workers are hardly the only service employees who are struggling right now. There are workers in theme parks and Disney and other studio lots who are similarly in tough spots. And they're also negotiating contracts. And for the first time in really anyone's memory in LA, these unions are now sharing their negotiation information. They're sharing the offers they're receiving with other unions. They want each other to know what it is they're being offered, and so that they can't be played off one another. Right. That's something I think that's been missing from union organized labor activity for a long, long time. And I think if you look at the sort of roadmap of labor in the United States, you'll see this really disparate collection of mostly smaller groups. There are a few really powerful, larger unions. Everybody else is 50,000 or less. And, it makes more sense to pool that power, and that's been a long time coming. So it's really interesting to see how some of the unions in LA have tried to attack this by, at the very least, pooling their information. And by the way, the Writers Guild has been on the picket line alongside the hotel workers and vice versa. SAG-AFTRA members have showed up at the hotel worker strikes and vice versa. So it's a summer of labor unrest in LA, and it may ultimately turn out to really be a summer of solidarity. The question is, what does that lead to? And we just don't know the answer.
No, as I always say, look, we're in a moment right now where the hope is that we start adopting a striker and we find our way to a picket line. And we get out there, and because as the old saying goes, the larger the picket, the shorter the strike. So the more people who are involved, the more people who are taking part of it, maybe there will be some influence. So last line of questioning I've got for you, because we're in this moment where you've got these behemoth corporations who have such overweighted power. What do people do? How do we push back in a better way, do you think? Are you seeing what they're doing is successful, or is this something legislatively that we've got to eventually come around to, or is this a people thing?
Well, the larger answer, I think, is certainly, takes you to Washington, D.C. and, the will of congressional leaders to enact stronger labor laws, and for that matter, enforce the ones that are already on the books. Short of that, one thing that's interesting about what Hollywood's doing, and the hotel workers have done this pretty effectively too, is sort of understanding that part of the process, the rules violations part of the process has really got no teeth right now. They're just publicly shaming these companies. They're going right after the CEOs, for example, of the Hollywood studios, repeatedly pointing out their unbelievable compensation packages, repeatedly pointing out what the studios make. The hotel workers in LA have done a really effective job in this same way. Hollywood has the added advantage of being able to say, here's the CEO of Disney, Bob Iger. Here's exactly what he got paid last year. You can publicly embarrass and shame these companies, and some of them who do to a certain extent rely on people's goodwill for their business will take note. Whether it affects their behavior at the bargaining table, we don't know yet. But it's one of the only ways, the only tactics that I think has a realistic chance. It's not perfect, and it takes a hell of a lot of effort, and it takes some community support, but it can work.
And it takes communication. You got to get out and you got to talk to other working people. This is not, we can no longer be in a moment of isolated strikes and isolated instances. We've got to bring everyone in. It's got to be a community thing. As I said, like my grandparents' generation, they understood secondary boycotts and secondary strikes. When the company down the street went on strike, everybody on the street went on strike. That's how I think we have to return. But Mark, I appreciate the work. I appreciate the time. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again as this continues. The piece, How Striking Hollywood Creators and Hotel Housekeepers Face the Same Obstacles, written by Mark Kreidler. We'll get a link out on social media. You can check out his website, markkreidler.com. Mark, thanks so much, buddy. Appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks, Rick.
Want to hear your thoughts? 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Now, look, here's the reality. You've got these workers who are on strike, and they're taking on enormous power, and they know it. Look, they know that these studios are out to break them, and this is not unique to them. This is every strike that happens. There's the calculus of how long can the company last, how long can the workforce last, and that's when they start talking again. What happened with the Teamsters and UPS? UPS figured out, hey, they're serious. We could lose billions of dollars if this is a prolonged strike. And the White House stayed out of it. Good on them. Understanding, look, If you're going to be the most pro-union president in our lifetime, you got to go, get out there and fight for yours. Get out there and fight for better wages, hours, conditions. Get out there and do the work. And I think that's a testament to the administration. Now, how Wall Street wanted to frame it is wanted to scare everybody. Go, well, it's going to hurt the economy. Well, maybe it will. That's part of this. But it would be UPS would have been the one causing that. Because, look, the Teamsters said all along, we're willing to negotiate. We're willing to sit down and talk about anything. But at the end of the day, you're an extraordinarily profitable company. You make your profit off the backs of our workers, our members, and their labor. They're getting some of it. And this is, kind of the same fight that's going on with the Writers Guild. Going, look, you keep cutting us, but you're making enormous profits. These streaming services are wildly profitable, making huge money. Their CEOs are pocketing enormous sums. We're just trying to eke out an existence. Now, look, I was in D.C. yesterday with probably, I think there were like 70 folks from the Writers Guild and the SAG-AFTRA folks. Nobody I recognized. Nobody I saw on TV. Nobody who go, hey, I know you. None of them. These are people who, they go to work and they do their job and they make enough to exist because they're doing what they're passionate about, what they love to do, and they're eking out an existence. The one person told me, they made like $38,000 a year. And I'm going, how? Well, this is what they've done to us. And when you find out that the vast majority of people who are on strike don't make all that much money, and there's only a handful of people who are making the millions, there's only one Tom Cruise. There are only a handful of people who are in that kind of that pay. Everybody else is just trying to make a living. And that's what should come out of this writers' strike and out of this Screen Actors Guild strike, because they are fighting for the extras who make $100 a day. They're fighting for the people who are trying to break into the business. Now, understand, this could be bad for the industry down the road. Not having anyone willing to come and be an extra because, hey, once I sell you my likeness once, you get to use it forever. And I'm working for you literally forever for free. Hello? That's why I say this is the first battle in this war. Now, there are going to be a lot of lawsuits going down the road as AI comes out, and the question is Mitt Romney right? Are corporations people? Is AI going to be a person? Will Siri be a person? Will Siri be able to vote at some point? Because evidently we're going to replace working people with computers. Now, what I find interesting, there's a lawsuit out there, and I think Sarah Silverman and a couple other people are involved in this, who are saying, hey, how can these computers have original thoughts? How can they write these scripts? How can they write articles? How can they do things without stealing from the internet and someone else's intellectual property? And it's an interesting argument, one that I think actually holds some weight. Question is, the Supreme Court, who seems to be the NASCAR of the Chamber of Commerce, funded by all of the big special interests, which way do they go? Which side are they on in this? Me, I'm on the side of the workers in every scenario, because working people have been getting screwed for so long. This is another one of those moments where every person should be saying, yeah, this is a fight we should all be involved in. This is something that we should all be supporting. Getting out in the streets and marching with these folks. Because, again, this is one of those weird moments where first they come for the extras. They said nothing. Then they came for the writers, said nothing. Then they came for the actors, said nothing. And eventually all of us are going to be replaced by a computer. Then what? Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. You excited about the brave new world? Want to hear your thoughts. Back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1990. That was the day that George H.W. Bush signed into law the Americans with Disabilities Act. The ADA prohibits employment discrimination of people with disabilities and requires public accommodations to be accessible. The passage of the act was the result of years of grassroots organizing by members of the ADA community and their allies. When President Bush signed the law, he said that if he had to thank everyone who had been involved, we'd never get out of here before sunset. The passage of the act had bipartisan support, but many business leaders worried about the ADA's effect, fearing the costs of accessibility accommodations to their bottom lines. While most business leaders did not oppose the act outright, they did push for amendments and concessions to weaken its impact. The business newspaper, The Wall Street Journal, called the act, quote, the Lawyers' Employment Act, warning that a flood of lawsuits on disability issues would harm businesses. In signing the bill, President Bush addressed business leaders specifically. He said, quote, you've called for new sources of workers. Well, many of our fellow citizens with disabilities are unemployed. They want to work, and they can work. And this is a tremendous pool of people. And remember, this is a tremendous pool of people who will bring to jobs diversity, loyalty, proven low turnover rate, and only one request, the chance to prove themselves. The passage of the ADA paved the way for fundamental changes in America's infrastructure, such as accessibility ramps, spots for wheelchairs on buses and subways, and parking accommodations. This was a major step forward, yet more work remains in order to build a society truly accessible to all. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
As John Mellencamp sings, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. True. And it's equally true that if you stand for everything, you won't amount to anything. In a remarkable achievement, a newly formed political party calling itself No Labels has managed to fall into both traps, standing up for everything and nothing at all. The fledgling entity is using every synonym in the book to assure everyone that it is a middle-of-the-road bipartisan centrist, both sides party, offering hybrid liberal-conservative solutions that won't offend anyone. But wait, they've chosen a multimillionaire coal baron and a multimillionaire son of a global plastics polluter to be their standard bearers. As a presidential ticket, Democrat Joe Manchin and Republican John Huntsman probably would unite voters of both parties against them. While they don't stand for much, there is one huge overriding issue that the No Labels hucksters strongly agree on: corporate money contaminating American politics. These, quote, reformers are in favor of it. Indeed, secret fat cat donations are the No Labelers' financial lifeline, having already hauled in hundreds of thousands of dollars from right-wing corporate interests. Such as, no, say the founders, we can't tell you who's buying the No Labels label, for the funders don't want the public to know their names or their special interests. Of course, secret funding of elections equals secret government of, by and far, the funders. By standing against the people's right to know, the group has put a flaming neon fraud label on their hokey reform party. Huntsman even admits it, saying financial disclosure would be the right thing to do, but, quote, that's not the way you play the game. This is Jim Hightower saying, the game? Just what we need. Another gang of corporate politicos who think governing America is a game to be won by hook or crook.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So some good news. Consumer confidence up everywhere. Everybody's, yeah, things are going well. Stock market's doing well, they say. Inflation's down, wages up. People are buying stuff. Things are good, except Biden's, approval rating and the fact that it's his policies that have made a lot of this possible. It's interesting how it plays out. Interesting. But, in survey after survey, consumer confidence is up. That's a good thing. Maybe it's going to equate into, some going, hey, it's those policies that we've been talking about here on the show for, 18 years, like reshoring manufacturing, rebuilding our infrastructure, that kind of stuff. Seems like a good idea. Also, it would be great if we had a tax code. If we had a tax code that encouraged work and rewarded work and not so much of moving money from one pocket to the other. That's why good news today. A number of folks put forth the Oligarch Act, oppose limitless inequality, growth, and reverse community harms act. That's a mouthful, but it's the Oligarch Act. And it's like, hey, we're going to start taxing some of these people. And here to share some thoughts on the Oligarch Act, I've asked Bob Lord to come talk with us. Bob is a senior advisor on tax policy with the good folks over at the Patriotic Millionaires. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, good to be on.
So walk me through what is the Oligarch Act and what's it going to do?
The Oligarch Act, I think, Rick, is the first tax bill of its kind. It is directed not so much at raising revenue, although it will raise revenue, but at addressing inequality. And what the Oligarch Act does is it takes the median household wealth, the family in America that's richer than half the population and poorer than the other half, the typical family right in the middle. And it says if you've got more than 1,000 times that much wealth, which would be over $120 million, you're going to pay 2% tax annually on the amount of wealth over that. And then it says if you've got over 10,000 times that much wealth, well, then the amount above 10,000 times is going to be 4%, and 100,000 times wealth, anything over that, 6%. And if you've got 1 million times the wealth of that typical family, then you're going to pay 8% on the amount above 1 million times. And believe it or not, we do have 3 Americans with more than 1 million times the wealth of the typical household.
1 million times. Because I was going to ask, how much is 1 million times the typical? What number is that?
It would be more than $121 billion.
And they would pay 8% tax on that $121 billion.
On the amount they have above the $121
above.
billion.
So we're giving them. No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about that $120 billion. We'll only take that dollar, 8% of that dollar above. I don't know.
Oh yeah, but Rick, the amount in between $12 billion and $120 billion, they'll pay 6% on that. So if this bill's enacted within a decade, we will have a much more equal America. We will restore the distribution of wealth that worked for us so well in the 1950s and 60s.
So you're saying to me, I want to get this right because I just said that I'd like to dig up Eisenhower and bring back the good socialist president's tax code. You're saying we're getting back there?
Yeah, it'll be a different kind of tax code. We'll be taking the dollars from them in a different way, but because it'll be a wealth tax instead of an income tax, but we'll be getting to about the same result.
So now I can already hear my frustrated millionaires now losing their minds. What, you're raising taxes? When I become a 120 billionaire, I'm not going to want to pay this tax.
Rick, not the ones I work with. I'm with the patriotic millionaires.
Oh, I'm talking about the ones who aren't actually millionaires, the ones who think they're going to win that lottery, the people who told me that we're taxed enough already, that there's too many taxes. We need to tighten the belt and learn to live within our means. Those folks.
Yeah, we all said that already. We have all these people out here who never ever will be subject to the estate tax, but they are against the estate tax because they think they're going to be super, super rich one day, and they don't want to have to pay it.
And I've said before, look, I would love to be able to pay the 8% tax that you guys are proposing. I'd love to pay that. That means I'd have $120 billion.
Right.
I mean, I don't know where the objectionable part of this is because, as my friend Morris Pearl likes to point out, the chairman of your organization, the Patriotic Millionaires, he wants to be able to walk down the street. He doesn't want to have to hire armed guards, and he wants to be able to live, kind of in a country that's free and open to everyone and not have to worry about, grandkids getting snatched up in the middle of the night. And I don't disagree with him.
Exactly. Morris says that, he's just as greedy as other millionaires. He's just greedy for a different kind of America, the one where everybody's happy.
So what are the chances of this piece of legislation, which was introduced by a number of House Democrats? I don't see a Republican's name anywhere near this. And I gotta be honest, I find it interesting because I don't see this being objectionable. You have people who have such enormous wealth, and we've got so many needs and a deficit that's so big and debt that's so big that, it seems like, I don't know, the person with all the money should be the one kicking in a little bit.
Well, when we conceived of this proposal about a year ago, and we started speaking to House members, and started with Kevin McCarthy, and went through all the Republicans first. No, we didn't, of course, we didn't go that route. But no, they're not going to be on board, and it's going to take a year and a half or so to kind of socialize this, to get folks used to the idea. And by then, hopefully, we'll have a different Congress come 2025, which, won't have quite as many Republicans, and we can get this thing passed.
Yeah. Now, look, I was seeing some of the numbers that you guys were throwing around. Something like, I thought we had more than 735 billionaires. I thought we were over 1,000, but you guys say that 735 billionaires saw their collective wealth grow during the pandemic over $4.7 trillion. While the average working family saw their standard of living actually go down. I don't know. I know I've heard people say, all the rich people pay all the taxes. I mean, it seems like they got all the money. I mean, this just seems like something that should really be nonpartisan, that working people should go, look, we need better roads and bridges and schools and healthcare and infrastructure. We need all this stuff. It's got to be paid for. Our work creates this wealth for these folks. Maybe we should be distributing it a little differently. That seems logical to me.
Oh, absolutely. And no, they don't pay all the tax. I mean, Gabriel Zucman and Emmanuel Saez, showed this, how the top 400 taxpayers pay total tax at a lower rate than everybody else.
Yeah, that's what giving people all the money and buying lobbyists and politicians will get you. While, as you guys point out, 60% of this country is living paycheck to paycheck, and it
doesn't trickle down. And no, they're not job creators. You know what creates jobs? Consumer demand creates jobs. Money in people's pockets is what creates jobs.
So I look at the fact that, again, you threw out this statistic that we've used a number of times on this show, that, that 40% of the country can't afford a $400 financial emergency, which is just incredible to me. And that a third of the people who get up every day and go to work make less than $15 an hour. And you go, we've got people who have such unimaginable wealth. The fact that we wouldn't go, hey, maybe kick in a little bit. Now, here's the question I have for you, because I've said for a number of years that if we had a much higher tax rate, maybe we wouldn't have so many people making less than $15 an hour. Maybe we would have a more equal distribution of wealth, because these wealthy people wouldn't want to pay it to the government. They might pay it out in better wages and funding healthcare and funding schools and funding other stuff. Might want to spend it a little bit differently locally. That's the argument that I
mean, like the way it worked in the 50s and 60s?
Yeah, kind of like that.
Right.
No, but I think that's important to keep pointing out.
In inflation-adjusted dollars, the highest our minimum wage ever was in 1968, and it's effectively decreased since then.
Yeah, it was $1.60 an hour back then.
Well, whatever it was, it's equivalent to, I think, $15 an hour now, or something like that. I don't know what the actual number was, but when you adjust for inflation, it's a lot more than the $7.25 an hour minimum wage we have today.
Yeah, no, it was $1.60 an hour back then, and you're right, it was double the current minimum wage, thanks to the fact that we haven't seen an increase now. In fact, this month, 14 years ago this month was the last time we increased the minimum wage. And that was the Bush administration. So we went through the entire 8 years of Obama, the 4 of Trump, and now the entire Biden term with no increase in the minimum wage. In fact, today you had Bernie Sanders and Bobby Scott put forth the Raise the Wage Act, looking for a $17 an hour minimum wage, which doesn't stand a snowball's chance in passing because we've got a Republican Party who's hell-bent on doing nothing in the House but talking about UFOs. I guess maybe we'll see a UFO before we see a minimum wage increase.
And you don't increase the minimum wage for 14 years. That's, when you take into account inflation, that's about a 40 to 50% pay reduction.
So how do we get this, Bob? How do we get this? You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're with Bob Lord. He's he's tax advisor with the Patriotic Millionaires. How do we get this moved forward? Look, I talk to individuals all the time, and when you have individual conversations, this is common sense. We have these gazillionaires who've made so much money off the backs of working people who are not paying the kind of tax rates that past generations have used. And they're hoarding huge amounts of resources that could be used more effectively. How do we get that into the groupthink? Because individually, I've yet to find someone who says, no, it's a good thing to have Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. It's a good thing to have gazillionaires who have more power than governments. How do we get it into that groupthink idea?
Well, the public's attitude has changed, and changed in a good way. Folks overwhelmingly do want to tax these billionaires. It has to change faster, and it has to change more overwhelmingly. And look, this is a start. For things to happen, they have to start somewhere.
Right.
And I think proposals like this, and this isn't the only one out there. President Biden's billionaire minimum income tax is a huge step in the right direction too, and it's a matter of the proposals being made and people demanding it. Power concedes nothing without a demand, and we need a country that collectively demands the change. And something, Rick, it's got to happen in 2024 because we're running out of time.
No, this to me is a huge election year issue because we've given so much power and control to a handful of people that they control our politics. And there's a Republican Party right now who's not doing anything to help average everyday working people because the pain and the suffering and the misery benefits them. Look, those Democrats, they're not doing their job. But Republicans are the ones gumming up the system. There are no ideas there whatsoever. So for me, the idea of going back to a tax code that rewards work, but says, no, we're not going to have gazillionaires. No, it's not good. It's not healthy for democracy to have this kind of wealth that isn't being productively used. I just think that's a winning message in 24.
You know something, Rick? It's not even good for the billionaires. That kind of wealth doesn't help people. It makes them unhappy.
I don't know. I think I would be happy if I had $1 billion. I don't know if I would be any happier with 120 than one. But and this is where I guess that question becomes.
What are you going to do with $1 billion that you couldn't do with 50 million?
See, now here's where I'm probably different. I would want a legacy. I would take on an issue like, I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland, and I was just talking about this. As a kid, at the end of the month, there was no food in our house. And it wasn't just our house, it was the whole neighborhood. So childhood hunger to me is an important issue. I would be the one who said, I got $1 billion. I'm going to do what I can to ensure that doesn't happen. And this is the thing that bothers me with a lot of our billionaires. I'm not seeing the kind of, benevolence that people believe that they have. I'm not seeing the kind of, and you think of Andrew Carnegie, he built a library system. We have very few, and look, he was a no good for nothing SOB from what a bunch of people have told me, but his legacy was the library system. Why don't we have billionaires who think in those terms?
They don't. In fact, they as a percentage of their wealth, they give less than everybody else.
Of course, that's how they got to be billionaires.
These billionaires, I think they average $10 million a year in charitable giving. Now, $10 million is a lot of money, but not when you're worth multiple billions of dollars. It's a really tiny percentage.
Yeah. So last question I've got for you. How do we get involved? What's the marching order for me? What do I do when I wake up? What's the motivator?
Anything that we can do to make the demand, whether it's, phone calls to representatives and senators, organizing people to rally for this, to vote, putting the question to these politicians at town halls, whatever we can do to make our voices heard, we got to do.
There you go. Patrioticmillionaires.org, the website, if you want to take a look at the work that they're doing. Bob Lord, Senior Tax Advisor there with the Patriotic Millionaires. Bob, always great talking with you, man. Good stuff, as always.
Thanks, Rick. Good to be here.
All right, let's take a quick break. I want to hear your thoughts. Should we be taxing billionaires? Do you agree with Jesse Ventura, former governor of Minnesota? There should never be a billionaire. I'm in the Jesse camp. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1775. That was the day the United States Post Office was created in Philadelphia under Benjamin Franklin. Franklin was a member of the Second Continental Congress. Among many other distinctions, Ben Franklin was named the nation's first Postmaster General. Franklin received a salary of $1,000, with an additional $340 for a secretary and comptroller. His responsibilities spanned all post offices from Massachusetts to Georgia, and he had the authority to hire additional postmasters as necessary. Previously, in 1753, Benjamin Franklin helped lead the postal service in the colonies. He made numerous improvements in the mail system, including setting up new, more efficient routes. He had also been able to cut delivery time in half between Philadelphia and New York by having weekly mail wagons travel both day and night via relay teams. In 1774, the British fired Franklin from his postmaster job because of his revolutionary activities. There have been postal unions dating back to the 19th century. Those early unions had essentially no bargaining rights. They existed largely as lobbying organizations that otherwise would have no say about their working conditions. Wage increases depended on the whim of Congress. On March 18, 1970, thousands of New York City postal workers walked off the job in protest. They were joined in the streets by 200,000 others in 30 major cities. Mail service ground to a halt, and the plight of postal workers was brought to the public's attention. The strike was soon settled, with Congress approving a 6% wage increase. The strike served as an impetus for the enactment of the Postal Reorganization Act of 1970, which granted unions the right to negotiate with management over their wages, benefits, and working conditions. Back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Now, look, going back to this tax thing, the reality is, and some of the numbers that Bob's organization put out, when you look at the fact that, like they said, 60% of the people in this country are living hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck. The money comes in, money goes out. It never makes it to the next week. 40% of people can't come up with $400. And interestingly enough, I have a friend who's a homeless advocate. And she says, look, one of the main reasons for homelessness, and it's mind-blowing when you stop and think about it. One of the main reasons people are homeless, car repairs. I mean, let that sink in for a second. Your car breaks down. You got to come up with $400 or $500 to get the car fixed. You don't have it. You don't have a credit card, the elasticity of a credit card, or maybe you're maxed out, whatever. You can't get the car fixed. So then what happens? Well, you can't get to work because public transportation in this country sucks. So now you lose your job. You got no money. Now you end up losing the place where you live, And because you've gotten thrown out of one place, that means you're probably not getting another because, one, you don't have any money. So just something simple like, the alternator went could lead to mass chaos. And that has everything to do with the fact that a lot of the jobs in this country, just don't pay. So when I see, these right-wing think tanks saying, oh my gosh, they're talking about raising the minimum wage. That's going to cost 130,000 jobs. Is it? And where are you getting, which orifice did you pull that number out of? I think I have an idea. Because what we know, when you raise the minimum wage, there's actually an increase, very slight, but an increase in jobs. And why is that? Well, that's because more people have money in their pocket to spend locally. And that is the engine, as Bob Lord pointed out, that's the engine for an economy. People with disposable income spending money on, stuff that they need, like a new alternator. The fact that you have, as I said, a third of the people in this country working for less than $15 an hour, that's a problem with distribution of wealth. Now understand, as we talked about, the minimum wage back in the late 60s was $1.60 an hour, or in today's terms, twice what our minimum wage is, which meant that everybody across the board was at least making. Now again, the minimum wage does leave out a lot of people, and we can get into that argument if we have to. But for the mass of people, especially the folks making minimum wage, it was something you could almost live on. Something you could, I don't know, have an apartment, drive a crummy car, pay your college tuition on, and go to school. No people have done it. And what happens is when we have this kind of mass inequality like we're suffering through right now, social mobility goes down. You have other outcomes of poor social outcomes. You have lower life expectancy. You've got all kinds of more mental illness, all kinds of negatives. And as Bob said, the reality is rich people aren't any happier. Are you happier with 120 billion than you were with 119 billion? Well, maybe we should ask Elon Musk, who evidently, Mr. Free Speech decided that he was going to ban an ad launched by the folks over at the Progress Action Fund. Evidently, this it's called "Keep Republicans Out of Your Bedroom." This was the name of the ad, and evidently, it's been banned on X. It's no longer Twitter; it's now X. And this is one of those moments where you go, "Yeah, I know, Elon killed Twitter, $44 billion. It's done. It's now X." Which we can ridicule all we want, but the fact of the matter is, he took what was a social media platform that a lot of left and center left groups, had some clout in, and completely wiped it away, and has turned it into basically Gab, or Parler, or a right-wing cesspool. Congratulations. He did exactly what he wanted to do, because $44 billion, of lost money doesn't mean anything to him. This, not good for democracy. And look, what X is doing is silencing people that he doesn't agree with. Now, this is a guy who told you he believes in free speech. This is a guy who said, I bought Twitter because free speech. Silencing free speech. Now, look, I if you want to have that argument, it's about free speech. I know there's some purists. Great, fine, do that. But don't be the hypocrite of it, which is what Musk is. Because at the end of the day, he's a dictator. And I would argue not a benevolent one. Ask his workers. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You'll get ours. Thoughts, questions, comments, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show. where working people come to talk.